Hi, I'm Hugh Simpson-Wells, CEO of Oxford Computer Group. Thank you for downloading this recording of a recent webinar in which James Cowling, our CTO, and I will be talking about the security transformation. We start by talking about the security transformation and what we think it is and why we think it's so important. We go on to do something of a demo of an integrated solution using Microsoft cybersecurity features. And then we drill down to why we believe identity is at the core of modern cybersecurity. And there's room for some questions at the end. So now we're going to jump into that recording at the point where James is setting up why identity has become recognized as so important.
Important in security. Of course, identity has been important in operation management for a long time, provisioning of accounts and permissions and so on. But in terms of security, the recently published analysis of various attacks has shown that I think the number is something like 65 or 70% of successful attacks start with identity theft. So identity as core to security is not necessarily news to those of us in the business, but it's been increasingly accepted by the industry, I think, as being a fact. And quite a lot of organizations that we deal with haven't really got their security heads around this yet, that identity is very important, and we're still dealing with sort of log analysis and technical measures to deal with security more than looking at identities and preventing identity theft. So that was one of the things that was moving. Increasingly as well, the kind of slightly old-fashioned approach of you are either secure or you're not is giving way to the sense that nothing is completely secure. There are degrees of risk that we have to accept, and we in our own organizations have to decide where we're going to set the limits of risk. So assessing security and managing security based on a grayscale of risk is an emerging trend, if you like, and the tools are becoming increasingly available for us to do this. In addition, because cloud is very much on the rise, of course, and has been over the last several years, we've been looking at scale in terms of computing power. So we've got some very, very powerful machine learning capabilities emerging, and global signal and global telemetry. What I mean by that, historically security has been absorbing public signal in the sense that we've been subscribing to public fingerprints for malware detection, we've been subscribing to public lists of suspicious IP addresses and things like this for our perimeter filtering. But those are sort of isolated pieces of global signal. Increasingly, dealing with someone like Microsoft in our case, where they have an enormous web presence, their cloud experiences an enormous amount of activity in the security sense, an enormous number of attacks, and they get an awful lot of signal. And that's a great deal more signal than any single organization on their own would get. And by learning from their signal, by absorbing their learnings, or any cloud providers, but in our case, Microsoft in particular, we get the benefit of a lot more experience in the network, if you like, than we would just on our own. So this is an important trend. And the last one I've just listed here, increasingly attackers are using tools of various sorts, both to technically crack our security, but also to navigate and interrogate our networks for weak spots. And so making sure that we are responding with automated tools and not with human speed, clicking on big red buttons to lock accounts or responding to log analysis that might take place days later. These are simply too slow. These human approaches are simply too slow to counter automated attacks. So these things have led to the conclusion, and conversations with CSO customers have led to the conclusion that there's something quite important happening in the security business, and this is what we've titled the security transformation. And so just looking at, if I can get to the next slide. I don't seem to be able to. There we go. So the security transformation, I think, just in very high-level summary, has a couple of pieces, technical as well as organizational. So broadly speaking, in terms of technical security, we can now, with our computing and signal, we can now do real-time risk-based security. And the key thing here for security staff is that it's one thing, we need to be secure, of course, but we also need to know that we're secure, and we also need to know that when inevitably something happens to breach our security, whether it be misuse by internal users, accidental or deliberate, or a specific and deliberate attack by an external user, we need to know what's happening and need to know what we can do about it. And this has to happen across a number of products, not just our desktops and our collaboration platforms, our email systems, but also, of course, the directory operating systems and things like this. So it's not just, we don't just want point solutions in single products. And that is emerging. So we also need to be able to deploy our workloads flexibly. So talking to CISOs in particular, a concern is that departments in the organization are saying, I'd like to publish a website in partnership with some partner, and that's going to be a cloud website. And the CISO is, if their security framework does not include cloud as well as their on-premise stuff, they're simply unable to give a very quick green light. And that leads to the organizational piece, which is that security organizations in the past have very often been seen as something of a brake on, quite rightly actually in many cases, but a brake on the deployment of new services. And we can start to move to being a bit more of an accelerator. So we can say, yes, we have a strategy, we have a framework for handling security and identity and the permissioning of things in the cloud as well as on-premise, and it all works together. So this gives us this powerful integration from our hybrid standpoint. And I have noted here that Microsoft is very committed to hybrid, as we can discuss in more detail if anybody's interested. Another specific conversation I have with CISOs is that they are simply swamped with work in many cases. So an internal customer comes to them and says, I want to use some cloud app for my department, whether it be a marketing or a sales app or something. And the CISO, it is technically his responsibility to say, yes, that app is compliant and secure and you may use it or not, but he's simply not getting to it in many cases. It's simply a lot too much work to track all these things, and this leads him to put a brake on the proceedings much more than being an accelerator. So the transformation is that with the modern tools that we have, many of these positions and attitudes are changing, and it really transforms the position of security in the organization from being a naysayer to being a yes man. So that's, I think, the summary. And of course, there's an awful lot of detail underneath this, both technically and organizationally, that needs to be examined in any single case.
So James, this is about both cloud services and existing on-premises systems. It's not just about jumping into the cloud with both feet and abandoning all that legacy on-premises investment.
Yeah, indeed. So the hybrid nature of this, and by hybrid we mean mixing on-premises and cloud activity, is very, very important, because of course while cloud is cost-effective and fast to deploy typically and has a number of great advantages, it's not necessarily it's not where you want to put your crown jewels necessarily. So our crown jewels may very well stay on an internal system that we're keeping a very close and proprietary eye on, while our more commodity activities are happening in the cloud. So organizations doing both need security that spans both. And once again, we're seeing, I think, that these technologies to manage both are emerging.
So we're obviously a strong Microsoft partner. How do you feel about the way that Microsoft's been developing its cloud technologies? Do you think that they're fulfilling your dream of the security transformation?
Well, I think it's no coincidence that we talk to each other a lot. Of course, we're watching what Microsoft's doing and to some extent responding to it. They have been doing an awful lot. And those of you in the audience who follow Microsoft will know some of this already. But in terms of summarizing what they're doing, I think the best thing to do would be a quick walkthrough. So what we've got, I've just listed here, there are a number of ways of slicing this, but some core security activities that our customers tend to have to deal with. So compliance and data protection, so that's data leakage, and of course legal compliance around making certain that we know who has access to sensitive data and whether that sensitive data is being published in any way. We have already talked about identity, but the idea of risk around identity and the mitigation of that risk is an important feature. Protection of devices, so malware, patch management and so on. And when the event happens, detecting an attack quickly and responding to it quickly. And then after the event, for all sorts of good reasons, being able to analyze that attack and understand what it is that happened, how to prevent it, but also what was at risk, and perhaps who we have to notify that such and such was stolen, or such and such information was compromised. So these would be typical activities that we would have to deal with. And I'll just take you through, to the audience, I will vaguely apologize, these are screenshots, but as you'll see, there are quite a lot of moving parts in these demos, and in the time we have available, I'm going to do it with screenshots rather than a live demo. So what we'll start with is a little bit around the cloud compliance side of things, the compliance of applications. What we're seeing here, the individual products aren't really the focus of this conversation, but this is a product called Cloud App Security from Microsoft. And here we have discovered the apps that are in use as an organization, and you can see the list there. You can see some things about traffic and transactions. But what I'm most interested in here is the security score in these green and, in this case, an orange box. If I drill down on that, you can see that Microsoft has done the work. I was saying that CISOs tend to be overloaded with these things. Microsoft has done the work to examine, I think they claim 13,000 applications, cloud SaaS applications, for their security measures taken, and you can see some examples of them there, as well as the compliance measures taken and with what they are compliant and to what extent. So we can rely increasingly on these things. If we choose to trust Microsoft, we can rely on their analysis of these 13,000 applications and really accelerate the process of adopting these apps, which typically is that, you know, we're coming under pressure from internal customers to do that. So this is simply discovering what we're using and coming to a conclusion, is this a reasonable posture for us to take just from a compliance and security standpoint. Once we're using them, we need to make sure that the data that is being published or shared with these platforms is appropriate. So here is an analysis interface for us to establish what is being done. And in this case, we're looking for an access level of public. In other words, anybody who gets hold of a link can access this data. And here we're seeing the data that's shared in this way. And on the next slide, we're seeing a particular document that has been flagged as, and if you look over on the right here, you can see the classification label says that this is finance only and secret. And this was tagged by information protection monitoring. So it was classified, and this analysis tool establishes that it shouldn't be published in this way. So this is giving us actionable intelligence. We can see the collaborators here by, in other words, their identities. So the people who are doing things, the real people, not just the existence of some file somewhere. So the real people who are collaborating on this, who we can go and talk to, educate, and try and prevent this from happening again. In terms of standard compliance controls, we have a number of rule sets that we can apply within our environment, and we might be interested in PCI, so payment card information, which typically we're not supposed to publish and share, and we're supposed to keep close eyes on it. So we have some matches against PCI data detected in the cloud. Again, this is an analysis tool. And once again, we get actionable intelligence. So here we're seeing an Excel sheet published, and you can see the policy here that there is a data leak protection engine that's picked up that there's PCI in this document, and we should be paying attention. There are 28 people sharing this document, so we've got a few people we need to talk to. But again, actionable intelligence based on automatic detections. So just as the kind of the first attempt at talking about this, there's a piece of technology that Microsoft has been working on and is now really rolling out in force, which is the Azure Security Graph. Now, this is a security platform. It's a data set. It's a series of interfaces and engines that gather signal and telemetry from all sorts of Microsoft properties, and we'll be seeing some more in a moment. In this case, we've just seen some cloud app security stuff, but you saw some inputs from information protection as well. And that leads us to a compliance and data protection result, if you like. So just drilling down a little bit further, in this case, looking a little bit at some other properties that Microsoft offers, again, wrapped around the security graph. So here we're seeing Windows Defender Security Center. So this is running on Windows 10 platforms, and Windows Defender is reporting its results to our cloud portal, and we can see some activity here, some advanced threat protection, ATP alerts, some issues that have been detected. We can click on them and drill down on them. So we can see the machines over at the top right here that appear to be at risk, that have had these dubious malware or other suspicious activities detected upon them. And when we drill down, we can see in a graphical way, and I think this is fantastic, we can see in a graphical way, coming from this one machine, cont lisbeans, this is one computer, we can see that a particular file was active and spread itself. In this case, we can see 4 other machines. So we're getting, again, very clear analysis because of the way that the system can accumulate and collate information, the signal that it's getting. We're getting very clear information about the nature of an attack, and of course this can lead us to actions for remediation. So if it would move on to the next slide, if Hugh is not moving the mouse. There we go. So we can, using, again, same place, same Defender Security Center, if we can get hold of that file which was flagged up in the previous page, we can, because we're interested in what was at risk and what was really taking place, we can push it up to Microsoft's cloud, and they have a so-called destination chamber where they will execute that and observe all of its behaviors. And so you can see here the various deep analysis behaviors that were detected when this particular piece of software was executed. And if we drill down a little bit further, slightly slow, if we drill down a little bit further, we see here, we can go to a particular machine, and we can see that a particular file was executed. And if we drill down a little bit further, so here we were focusing on a particular machine, its activity, and here we can see that a particular attachment, in this case, was saved out of a file. So what we're trying to do here is find out how this infection arrived. What was the vector that allowed this lisbean computer to be infected? So here we're seeing, this is Windows Defender seeing activity on a timeline. So we can go back and say, okay, what happened around the time of this detected infection? And we can see here an attachment arriving. Up here you can see more details on this email in O365. So Office 365 is in the game. It also works with the security graph. And rather reassuringly here, we can now see this particular attachment was delivered to 3 people, including lisbean. Lisbean, as you can see here on the bottom right, lisbean, it was delivered to lisbean, but because it was flagged as malware by Defender and that was logged up to the security graph, it was blocked before the other 2 characters got to open this file. So it's a classic example of global signal leading to protection for us. So we can see from the previous graph, we know where this infection then was carried on to. So we might drill down and say, well, there are other computers that were infected. We saw that that sort of tree diagram spreading out. So we've now drilled down to one of the other computers, and here we're seeing, for example, this is actually Roger's computer, but we can see over on the right that lisbean is the user involved. So lisbean, the identity lisbean, was used to execute something on this other computer. Well, that's just a regular user account. It has no business getting into Roger's computer. So we can click on lisbean and drill down, and we jump practically to another product. This is advanced threat analytics, but we can now see down at the really detailed network level exactly what lisbean, her identity anyway, did, and her identity did some remote execution, I think it was a remote PowerShell in this case, to infect effectively another computer. And there are some recommendations and things on this timeline. Now what you've seen here is 3 more products just talking to each other. They're sharing their signal with the security graph, and they're responding to each other's signal in their appropriate way. So what we've seen here then is the security graph, as we can see, is now building in our pictures here into a significant source of intelligence and signal. And it is leading, in the case that we've now shown you, to device protection activity around malware and the detection and analysis part, so we can actually see what happened if an attack is at least partially successful. And down at the bottom, these happen to be products, right? These are product names, and some of them are running purely in the cloud, some of them are running on local workstations in our network, some of them are running on the server side in our network to analyze the traffic, but all of them are working together to feed signal to the security graph, which is then informing the behavior of various other things. So that is a very quick and I realize very high-level summary of the sorts of things that we can now expect from this integrated real-time signal that we're getting out of these various properties. The one thing I didn't really show in that series of slides, we saw some identities. In fact, there are identities attached to everything, hence the the general concept that identity is key to this whole business and central, because the mitigation involved in all of these things tends to be to talk to people, figure out what they were doing, figure out what happened to their data, figure out why they, or whether they logged in from that particular location, and so on. But I think, Hugh, you took some load off here, and I think you're going to talk a little bit about identity risk and mitigation as kind of the missing piece.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's very much a story about identity and about integration. And in fact, Oxford Computer Group's story has been identity for over a decade. And I think we started doing identity management at a time when it wasn't really a thing. So I see this as very much the coming of age of identity. And we hear the term identity-driven security a lot. So let's drill down into that. Now, I'm going to do a demo in a moment. Very wisely, James didn't actually do a live demo. I'm going to try and do a live demo for the little piece that I'm going to do. So here's the setup, first of all. We've got a user here who wants access to some on-premises stuff, but also access to cloud stuff and wants that to be seamless. Now, I'm not going to cover here how that's achieved. It's a combination of using Azure AD Connect and either ADFS or pass-through authentication, but in other webinars we've talked about the whole business of single sign-on and how we synchronize Active Directory and Azure Active Directory identities. Let's say that it's happened. Okay, so this user has some on-premise stuff and some cloud stuff that they want to get access to. Now, a little addition here is that we have an application here which we rather amusingly called the Crown Jewels. The thinking being, here's an organization that wants to put lots of stuff in the cloud, but there are some things they consider to be so important that they're going to be kept under their own control and on premises. But for the user experience, I still want the user to be able to get at these apps all in much the same way. So to achieve that, we make use of the Azure Application Proxy, which is a way of allowing us to have an app that we not only can get to through the MyApps portal, but we can protect it through all the mechanisms that James has been talking about and that I'll show you shortly. So we're going to get MyApps. We've got apparently a MyApps application, which is going to take us to an on-premises application. And the first thing that we've added here is to bring in some identity protection. In other words, we're making use of that Azure Security Graph that James was talking about. We've got available to us signals based on data from many sources, including lists of compromised credentials that might be available on the black market. We've got behavioral analytics, just odd behavior, out of pattern, unusual patterns of behavior, and so on. And so we can achieve the assignment of a risk of a user or even a particular authentication, and we can decide whether to let that user on this occasion have access to their apps or to take the view that there's something we don't like about it and either block it completely or perhaps push them to reset their password or some other action. That's the first thing we'll do. And the second thing we can do is we can get some conditional access control. In other words, we can take the view that some of these apps we should just be able to get access to without any fuss and bother. For example, perhaps this person's mail. And other things like our crown jewels, we might want to take the view that there should be a policy applied that to get to that, you're going to, we could block it completely under some circumstances, but we could force through another layer of authentication. So we'll go to multi-factor authentication in this case. So that's the setup. Let's see what that actually looks like. The first thing I'm going to do is just fire up a new browser. And in that browser, I'm going to go to MyApps portal as a particular user. The user I'm using is called Alan Piper, and I've got this fictitious company set up called Labrador. So we're going to the labrador.xyz domain, and I'm going to try logging on as this person. And with a bit of luck, I'll get to the MyApps portal, and everything will be pretty much as normal. Now contrast that with what happens if I use the Tor browser to do that. Now the Tor browser, if I can bring it up, the Tor browser is a browser that makes use of unusual routes and therefore can be used to trigger a risk event. In other words, as I come in from the Tor browser, the security graph is going to take the view that this has risk associated with it, and I've set this up, I hope, to block this. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing, and you'll see that it has recognized the domain and everything. Everything's just the same. But when I come to put in the password, actually, I timed out, so that wasn't actually what I was looking for. We'll just try that again. And this time it says the sign-in was blocked. So we'll see why that happened. We'll see how that was set up in a moment, but you can see that that's the user experience. So the user doing what was considered to be a risky sign-on wasn't allowed. Now to get to mail, I'm going to click mail. This is back to the original browser, and here I am getting to my mail in a perfectly normal way. But if I want to get to the crown jewels, I'm going to get further challenged. So this is the conditional access part of it coming into play, and I'm going to get a text sent to me with a number. I'm going to put that number in, and most of you will have done this at some point, and with a bit of luck that will get me to my crown jewels. Remember, what this is doing is taking me to an on-premises application, and so what we're getting is this proper, and there are the crown jewels. So what we're getting is this proper integration of everything that's going on, this proper hybrid environment in which we're benefiting from the security graph that James has been talking about. Let's look at how that's actually implemented. The first part of this is, here we are now in Azure AD, and we can see that Alan Piper is a user there that we could be managing just like any other user. So what I'm going to do next is show you the identity protection part of that. This is the part where the user was blocked because they were considered to have an unsafe authentication. And you'll see that we've got a user risk policy, so that's how we would deal with risky users. The one I used, and so the one that I'll show you, was a sign-in risk. So we go to the sign-in risk, we say all the users, this particular policy has been set up so that all the users and the condition associated with it is low and above. In other words, even the slightest risk, we're going to block access, and that's exactly what happened. So it's that simple. Having configured this in the interface here, we were able to benefit straight away from that. Of course, we might not set it up in this way normally. A low risk is probably not something we worry about quite that much, but for demonstration purposes it works rather well. The next thing I'm going to show you is the conditional access piece of that. So we're going to be managing various applications in this environment, and I will go to all applications. You can see that this is a real demo, and so it can be a little slow in places with everything that's going on my laptop here and on my internet. And here we see the list of applications, and amongst them, of course, there is Exchange Online. We went to that, but it's the Crown Jewels one that interests us, so let's have a look at that and how we configured that. And associated with that, we've got a conditional access policy. I'm going to bring that up. And this is called the Crown Jewels policy, for obvious reasons. And what we're saying is that all users for this particular application, Crown Jewels application, we have under the condition that's actually all locations. So this isn't really a condition at all. This is just saying all locations, but there could be different conditions associated with it, associated with devices or whatever. And what we've said is force multi-factor authentication. And there are other things that we could have done as well. And what happened when we did that is that we were taken to a virtual machine. So here's the virtual machine. This is the representation of our on-premises server. And there is the application that we got to. It's a simple web page, but it could be something serious, of course. And the last thing we might try and do is, if we go back to our Azure Identity Protection, we may be able to see that James, you might want to help me out here. I'm just looking for our report. Take a different view. If I go to manage, I'll go to a different portal where I am certain that I can find the event having been logged so that we can come back later and obviously review such attempt to log in. In this particular case, waiting for it to catch up. And I apologize that I didn't have this ready. Of course, I should have done. But if we go to our directory here and go to reports, amongst the reports will be irregular sign-in or users with anomalous sign-in activity. And we would hope that amongst the users reported here would be Alan Piper, and there he is. Okay, so I don't know whether that's the actual one or one I did earlier, but you get the idea. So I think with that, I'll hand back to James. Are you ready for that, James?
Sure. Yes, thank you for that. It's worth pointing out, I think, that that application proxy is proving very popular because it doesn't require any inbound net traffic from the internet to our network. It's all outbound from our network to make the request. So it's proving very, very popular from a security standpoint. So yes, what we've seen there, Hugh just filled in the kind of the missing link here. He's shown us some stuff around identity risk and some mitigation steps like forcing MFA or forcing a password reset. So it's kind of completes what is at the moment a pretty Microsoft-oriented picture. But I wanted to just make one more comment about it before we kind of move to a summary. That this graph is available to partners, and we already have, and again, this is emerging still, there's still plenty of work going on with this, but we're already getting signals from Lookout, which is a pretty well-known application running on mobile devices, detecting malware and other poor behavior by software on mobile devices. That is not a Microsoft property, but it does contribute data to the security graph. And that's one example of something contributing. And equally, there are applications consuming from the security graph that aren't owned by Microsoft. So ping access being one example of that, where we as security people want to provide access to on-premise web apps, to on-premise users, by the way, using URL authentications and authorizations, and ping access will refer to the risk levels reported by Azure Security Graph and apply its own security, its own conditional access type policies to it. So this is going to be incredibly powerful. It's already pretty powerful, and it's going to be increasingly powerful as the sheer volume of signal and the reach of the signal that we're getting increases and improves in quality and volume. So this is, I think, really very important, this movement, if you like, in the market to this core heavy computing based security analysis. And it's pretty exciting, actually. It's the most excited I've been since identity was the exciting thing about 10 years ago. So it's pretty good stuff. Now, just wanted to therefore sort of pull out some summary points. So we're seeing here, and the key thing is, this is all very cross-product. So Microsoft has historically been very product-focused. And as we know, security tends not to be very product-focused, although you can attack a single product. Attackers like to attack the gaps between products. So we might be looking at the logs from one product or one platform, if you like, and missing the fact that there's something going on in a downstream product. So by integrating all of these things, we do get seamless security, and we get fewer gaps to be attacked because we're all using the same, all the products are using the same security platform for recording and analyzing their security activity. So as we've seen, it also wraps itself around both cloud and on-premises. In other words, it enables hybrid solutions very powerfully. And the key part, I think, that's just its relevance to us is that what it gives us is actionable intelligence. It doesn't just give us a load of log data that we have to sort of figure out what happened. It actually gives us interfaces that does a lot of pre-analysis for us and delivers to us buttons we can press to say, force this user to reset their password, or drill down to the computer and find out which file was compromised, or does this malware encrypt data, or does it steal it and send it to a command and control server somewhere? So this is actionable intelligence, very relevant, very important to us. And I just wanted to pull out one thing around the organizational part. Conversations with customers, I referred to this, I think, at the beginning. Many customers haven't really got identity on their organizational radar as a security thing. So there is an identity team typically doing some stuff around provisioning, maybe Active Directory, or consuming HR data to do some group management or provisioning or whatever the good stuff might be. But the security team typically isn't very well dialed in with those identity guys. But of course, the identities are absolutely key. If our identities are not secure, then not much else is going to be secure. And therefore, there are discussions going on. I think to call it a general move is probably to exaggerate, but there are serious discussions going on about the need for bringing a secure identity group into the security team. In other words, sort of taking it out of a technology group or an infrastructure group and having them actually working directly with the security people as part of the security team. This gives the advantage of supporting the decisions made around purchasing. So if someone wants to buy a new platform or wants to use a cloud platform, the identity guys are right there talking about technical stuff like which protocols are in use, are we using the right identities, can we consume this security graph signal, or is there an equivalent in that system, those sorts of things. And this can obviously enhance our security over time and make the best use of the investments that are being made in our various platforms. So I just wanted to flag that as a thing that we're certainly pursuing with several customers right now. So I would, before I open the floor to questions, I just quickly want to ask you to just let me know who you think you are, where you sort of sit in internal or external organizations. This is really just a matter of interest for us. If anybody would like to give an opinion, you don't have to vote. By all means, ignore me, but it's of interest to us to kind of put you on a map somewhere to understand who it is that we're talking to.
And do by all means type in any questions that you might have while that poll's going on.
Yeah, we'll take questions in the chat window.
I'm not actually seeing the poll, but I assume it's happening. James, is it?
I can.
Okay.
I'll give it another few seconds. We'll usually give it about a minute, and let you vote within a minute. It's not a particularly difficult question.
So if you have questions, do type them in. Also, as you can see, we've got some suggestions to where you can get further information about the topics we've been discussing.
Yeah, so we've got these events coming up where we will be getting into much more technical, they're day-long events to allow us to actually get into real demonstrations and real discussions about how this really works rather than just a quick half hour. One of the things that we are doing with some customers are workshops around this, so digging around, what does this mean for them in practical terms around security, so looking at their existing platforms and their plans to use cloudy technologies to support or replace some of those platforms. And these can be very interesting events to make sure that you are making the most of all these things. Very much of what we've seen from Microsoft is kind of in the licenses that many users have already, many organizations have already. And so you're not necessarily paying a good deal extra for this stuff, you should just be using it. So I'm not seeing any questions, so I might just put up a fairly obvious question that we would ask at this point. Namely, is security transformation a thing that you guys might be interested in? Be as honest as you like, be brutally honest, or don't bother with it, but it'd be interesting to know if anybody sees a conversation as a valuable thing. So we'll give that a minute or so. Okay, I've got some quite encouraging feedback there. I'll give you another 30 seconds. All right. Again, a very complicated question. So we're getting something over 80% as yes, sometimes this year, so that's very encouraging. So thank you for that feedback. And with that, I will pass it back to Hugh. So we're not seeing any questions here. I think we might just say.
I think, yeah, I think we've nicely filled up the time, and if there are no questions, I think we'll wrap it up, give you a few minutes back, and thank you everybody for attending, and see you next time on another webinar.
Thank you.